Saipan, Mariana Islands, July 7th, 1944. The air is a toxic perfume. It is the sweet, cloying smell of gardenia and plumeria, the island's tropical flowers, mixed with the stomach-turning stench of cordite, diesel fumes, and rotting human flesh. The battle is, according to the maps at headquarters, over. The largest banzai charge of the war, a final, suicidal wave of 3,000 Japanese soldiers, has just been annihilated. The battle is won. But the war for Saipan is not over. It has just entered a new, more horrifying phase. This is not a war of front lines. It is a war of 10,000 dark volcanic caves. It is a war of ledges, of crevices, of ravines. And it is a war against an enemy that the American doctrine does not understand. A squad of Marines, part of the 2nd Marine Division, is working a ridge. They are no longer soldiers. They are exterminators. They move with a grim, practiced efficiency. They approach a black slash in the rock face, a cave opening. The squad leader, a sergeant, does not call for surrender. He does not ask his riflemen to provide covering fire. He simply gestures. The flamethrower man steps up. He takes a breath. He depresses the trigger. A thick, liquid rope of jellied gasoline erupts, a searing orange-black plume that punches 30 yards into the darkness. It is followed by a sound, a muffled, high-pitched, inhuman scream that is cut short almost as soon as it begins. The smell of burning blossoms is replaced by the smell of burning hair, of cooking meat. The flamethrower man steps back. Another Marine, carrying a satchel charge, runs forward, hurls the explosive package into the blackness, and dives for cover. The explosion is deep, a hollow thump that shakes the rocks. Dust and smoke billow from the cave mouth. The sergeant ticks a mental box. Cave 214. Cleared. He gestures. They move on to the next one. This is the official doctrine. It is the established solution to the impossible problem. The impossible problem is the Japanese soldier. The Marine Corps is not fighting a traditional army. It is fighting a death cult. The Imperial Japanese soldier is bound by a code, Bushido, that makes surrender an unthinkable spiritual crime. It is the ultimate dishonor, a stain on his family, his ancestors, and his emperor. He is told, and he believes, that the Americans are white devils. He believes that if he is captured, he will be tortured. His testicles will be cut off. He will be forced to eat his own entrails. He will be set on fire. And so, when the battle is lost, he does not raise his hands. He does not wave a white flag. He pulls the pin on his last grenade and holds it to his chest. He forms a human chain to pass an explosive down a tunnel. He wraps himself in dynamite and waits in a spider hole. Or he charges with a bamboo spear at a machine gun just for the chance to take one of the devils with him. The official doctrine is a suicide pact, met by a policy of extermination. This is the hell of the Pacific War. This is the story we all know. The story of a war without mercy, of a clash between two systems that demanded total annihilation. It is the story of flamethrowers and satchel charges, of banzai cliffs and mass suicides. But this is not that story. This is the story of a loophole. A story of a single, baffling, impossible exception. It is the story of how that entire, unshakable system of mutual destruction was brought to its knees for one day by the most ridiculous, unauthorized, and stupid weapon imaginable. It is the story of one Marine, a tiny, overlooked, streetwise kid from Los Angeles, who decided the official doctrine was wrong. A Marine who had no rank, no authority, and no permission, but who was about to achieve the impossible. This is the story of how a bluff, a joke, and a few simple, stolen words did what an entire division could not. This is the story of how one man, in one day, convinced 800 enemy soldiers to do the one thing they were sworn never to do. To understand the bluff, you must first understand the stakes. By July 1944, the war in the Pacific was at a pivot point. The slow, bloody, island-hopping campaign, begun in the swamps of Guadalcanal, was finally approaching its endgame. The target was the Mariana Islands, and the jewel of the Marianas, the key, was Saipan. Saipan was not just another tropical rock. It was the front porch of the Japanese Empire. It was, to the Japanese, considered part of the homeland. It was administered by Tokyo. It was populated not just by soldiers, but by over 20,000 Japanese civilians, farmers, fishermen, shopkeepers. And it was the linchpin of the entire B-29 bomber offensive. The new bomber, the B-29 Superfortress, was the war-winning weapon, a long-range, high-altitude marvel. But it needed a base. From bases in China, it had struggled. But from Saipan, it was a 1,500-mile straight shot to Tokyo. The American High Command, men like Admiral Spruance and General Holland Howland Mad Smith, knew this, and the Japanese High Command knew it too. This was the island. This was the battle that would decide whether the American bombers could begin the final fiery destruction of the Japanese homeland. The Japanese, under General Saito, had defended it with over 30,000 elite, hardened troops. They were ordered to hold it to the last man, and they did. The battle, which began in June, was the most brutal of the war. It was a month of relentless, close-quarter slaughter. It culminated in the final, desperate banzai charge on July 7th, where thousands of Japanese soldiers, many of them wounded, some of them armed only with rocks or bayonets tied to sticks, charged the American lines and were mowed down in piles. Now the battle was over. General Saito had committed ritual suicide. The American flag flew over the island. But the island was not secure. This was the institutional problem. The system, the Marine Corps, had declared victory. But thousands, perhaps 10,000 Japanese soldiers, stragglers, had melted into the hills. They were joined by the 20,000 civilians who were equally terrified, equally indoctrinated, and equally suicidal. From the caves and the jungle, they were waging a guerrilla war. They ambushed patrols. They picked off sentries. They sabotaged trucks. They were a bleeding ulcer, an infection that was keeping the 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions and the 27th Infantry pinned down. The ticking clock was the invasion of Tinian, the next island in the chain. It was scheduled. The ships were waiting. The Marines were supposed to be resting, refitting, rearming. Instead, they were stuck on Saipan, playing a grim, lethal game of hide-and-seek, one flamethrower burst at a time. The institutional arrogance was the response from the High Command. General Smith and the other commanders saw this as a simple math problem. There was no other way. The no-surrender mentality of the enemy was a given. Therefore, the only response was total extermination. The official policy was to take no prisoners. It was not written down, not always, but it was understood. It was a waste of time, a waste of resources, and a good way to get a grenade in the back. The established solution was the flamethrower and the satchel charge. The established solution was to turn every cave into a tomb. It was a slow, agonizing, and costly process. It was costing Marine lives every single day, and it was holding up the entire war. The system was perfect in its own brutal logic. It was also fundamentally failing. It was failing to secure the island quickly. It was failing to save American lives. And it was failing to see the one weapon it possessed that could break the stalemate. That weapon was not a bomb. It was a 19-year-old Marine Private First Class, a tiny kid from East L.A., who had a secret. He was a man who, unlike anyone else in the entire U.S. Marine Corps, could speak their language. His name was Guy Gabaldon, and he was the last man in the entire Marine Corps anyone would pick for a hero. He was not a square-jawed, corn-fed giant. He was tiny, 5'4", maybe 130 pounds soaking wet. A fast-talking, sharp-witted, bantamweight kid from the tough, multi-ethnic streets of East Los Angeles. He was not a model Marine. He was a maverick, a wise guy, a rule-breaker. He had a smart mouth that constantly got him into trouble and a rebellious streak a mile wide. His officers saw him as a discipline problem, a runt, a goof-off. He was perpetually on latrine duty, perpetually in trouble. A low-status private first class who was one smart aleck comment away from a court-martial. He was, in every possible way, an uncredentialed, overlooked, and completely un-Marine-like Marine. But Guy Gabaldon had a secret, a unique, on-the-ground, and utterly bizarre qualification that no one in the chain of command knew about, and no one would have cared about if they did. He was not a trained interpreter. He had not studied Japanese in a military language school. He had learned it in the alleys, on the playgrounds, and at the dinner tables of his neighborhood. Gabaldon was a product of East L.A. As a kid, he had been practically adopted by a Japanese-American family, the Nakanos. He had spent his formative years living with them. He ate their food, he did chores in their house, he celebrated their holidays, and he learned their language. He did not learn the formal, stilted, textbook Japanese of the military translators. He learned the real language. He learned the slang, the jokes, the curse words. He learned the nuances, the honorifics, the way a person from the city spoke versus a person from the country. He understood the culture, the superstitions, the family ties. He did not just speak Japanese, he thought in it. When Pearl Harbor happened, his Japanese-American family, the Nakanos, were sent to an internment camp. Guy, filled with a complex, youthful rage, had enlisted in the Marine Corps. He had gone through boot camp, been shipped to the Pacific, and landed on Saipan with the 2nd Marines. He was now a scout and observer, a tiny kid with a big rifle attached to regimental headquarters. And he was watching the official doctrine in action. He was watching the flamethrowers. This was his eureka moment. It was not a flash of genius. It was a wave of pure, profound sickness. He watched the satchel charges. He heard the screams. And unlike every other Marine on that ridge, he understood exactly what he was hearing. He heard the word kuso, shit. He heard them screaming for their mothers, okasan. He heard them crying, not as monsters, but as terrified teenage boys, just like him. And he saw the civilians. He saw the bodies of women and children incinerated in the caves, or the shattered forms of families who had leapt to their deaths from the cliffs, all based on a lie. He knew, with a certainty that no one else on that island possessed, why they would not surrender. It was not just Bushido, it was the propaganda. He had heard the radio broadcasts. He knew, from his own childhood, what they were being told. That the white, blue-eyed Marines were monsters, that they were rapists and torturers, that they would kill them in the most agonizing ways possible. He looked at the flamethrower, the established solution, and he realized the terrible, insane irony. The Americans, by acting like the monsters of the propaganda, by burning them alive, were proving the Japanese propaganda correct. They were validating the enemy's worst fears. They were, in effect, fueling the no-surrender policy. This was his unique observation. What if, he thought, they just knew the truth? What if someone could just talk to them?
He went to his commanding officer. It was a disaster. He was dismissed, laughed at, and ignored. He was a PFC, a runt. Sir, I think I can get him to surrender. I speak Japanese. The lieutenant looked at him like he was insane. Shut up, Gabaldon. Get back to your post. You speak their language. What are you, a spy? A Jap lover? The very idea was stupid. It was naive. It violated every single rule of the Pacific War. It was a joke. The established leadership did not just dismiss his idea, they were contemptuous of it. This was the catalyst, the grinding daily horror, the sight of another family, a mother and two small children, jumping from a cliff. He could not take it. The system was wrong. The doctrine was a failure. The experts were idiots. He was going to break the rules. That night, he made a decision. It was not a decision, it was a compulsion. He was going to commit a capital offense. He was going to leave his post in a combat zone at night. He was going to go AWOL. He slipped away from his foxhole. He didn't tell his buddy. He didn't tell his sergeant. He just vanished, alone, into the darkness. He was now in no man's land. He was risking a court-martial. He was risking being shot in the back by a nervous Marine sentry, or being butchered in the dark by a Japanese patrol. He was, by every military definition, a deserter. This was his unauthorized test, his new tactic. He crept through the jungle, his M1 rifle at the ready. He knew where the caves were. He found one, a dark, gaping mouth in the rock that his unit was scheduled to clear with flamethrowers in the morning. He stood outside, his heart hammering so hard he thought the soldiers inside must hear it. He was terrified. He was a 5'4" kid, alone, in front of a cave full of enemy soldiers who were sworn to kill him. He took a breath, and he spoke. He did not shout, "Surrender or die" in English. He did not use the formal Japanese he had heard on the propaganda leaflets. He used the slang of East L.A. He kept his voice low, casual, non-threatening. Hey in there. My name is Guy. I'm an American Marine. I know you're in there, and you're probably scared. I am not here to hurt you. Silence. A terrifying, absolute silence. He could feel the rifles, the grenades, aimed at his voice from the darkness. He tried again. He said, "You've been told a lot of lies. We are not monsters. We have food, we have water. The battle is over. You don't have to die." He said, "I grew up with Japanese people. My friends are from Saitama. I know Osaka-ben." He made a small joke about the food in L.A. He was just talking. From the darkness, a voice. A single, gruff, suspicious bark. "Are you a spy?" Gabaldon's heart leaped. He had a connection. He answered back, in the same rough slang. "No, you idiot. I'm a Marine. Look at me." He stepped partially into the moonlight. "Do I look like a spy? I'm just a kid. I don't want to see you die in here, and I don't want to get shot." He talked for almost an hour. He told them about the propaganda. He told them that they would be taken to a camp, that they would be fed, that they would be treated humanely under the Geneva Convention. Then, the test. The "it works" moment. A figure appeared at the mouth of the cave. A man, starving, his uniform in tatters. He was holding a grenade. He looked at Guy. Gabaldon did not raise his rifle. He just nodded. He said, "It's okay. Come on out." The man looked at him. He hesitated. And then, he dropped the grenade. He put his hands on his head. Another figure appeared behind him. And another. 2 soldiers.
2 armed Imperial Japanese soldiers who had been sworn to die for the Emperor had just been convinced to surrender by a 5'4" PFC with a smart mouth. Gabaldon, his knees shaking, disarmed them. He turned them around, and he had a new problem. How to get back to his own lines in the dark with 2 prisoners who looked exactly like the enemy. He marched them back. A sentry from his own company spotted them. The bolt of a rifle clacked. "Halt! Who goes there?" Gabaldon, in his high-pitched East L.A. voice, screamed, "It's me, you moron! It's Gabaldon! I got prisoners! Don't shoot!" He walked his 2 impossible prizes into the command post. The lieutenant, the same one who had laughed at him, stared. His jaw was on the floor. He could not process what he was seeing. Guy Gabaldon, the runt, the goof-off, had just walked out of the night with 2 living, breathing, surrendered enemy soldiers. He had done the impossible. The test was a success. The stupid idea was genius. Guy Gabaldon did not receive a medal. He received a threat. He was shoved into the command post tent, a 5'4" mud-caked private blinking in the lantern light. His 2 prisoners were quickly hustled away by baffled intelligence officers. The lieutenant who had laughed at him was now standing next to a captain, a hard, sun-scorched man with the dead eyes of a Tarawa veteran. This was the system. This was the boardroom. The captain was not impressed. He was furious. He did not see 2 saved lives. He saw a Marine who had abandoned his post. He saw a fundamental breach of discipline. He saw a tactical risk that beggared belief. He looked at Gabaldon with pure, undiluted contempt. You went AWOL, private, in a combat zone. You left your post, you walked into the dark, and you had a conversation with the enemy. Gabaldon, high on his success, tried to explain. "Sir, they are not monsters. They are just scared. They believe we will torture them. They have been told lies. I just told them the truth," he said. "I can do it again. I can save." The captain cut him off, his voice a low, dangerous hiss. "You are a naive, stupid kid. You are a Jap lover. You know what they do to our boys? You know what they did at the hospital? They booby-trap their own dead. They play dead and then blow up the corpsman who tries to help them. You think you can talk to them?" This was the institutional arrogance, the doctrine of the Pacific War, made manifest. The captain saw the world in a simple, brutal binary. Kill or be killed. The flamethrower was a tool. The satchel charge was a tool. This talking, this was not war. It was cowardly. It was stupid. And it was going to get good Marines killed. He jabbed a finger at Gabaldon's chest. He said, "You are confined to your post. You are not an interpreter. You are a rifleman. Your job is to shoot what I tell you to shoot. If I hear for 1 second that you have left your post again, I will not hesitate. I will have you court-martialed. Not for being AWOL, for communicating with the enemy, for treason. Do you understand me, Private?" Gabaldon understood. He was dismissed. The system had looked at his miracle, his loophole, and it had rejected it. It had called it a crime. He walked back to his foxhole, his mind reeling. This stupid idea was officially, unequivocally, dead. The flamethrower teams were still getting their orders for the morning. This was the conflict. The man who had seen the truth versus the system that was built on a lie. Gabaldon sat in the dirt, his rifle across his knees, and he listened. The night was not quiet. He could hear, in the distance, the thump of a demolition charge sealing a cave. He could hear the sudden, terrified shriek that was cut short by a burst of gunfire. And he looked at his fellow Marines. They were not the heroes of the newsreels. They were exhausted, traumatized, hollowed-out boys, forced to become exterminators. They were his friends. And this brutal, merciless doctrine was destroying them, too. It was burning away their humanity, one cave at a time. This was the gamble. This was the damn the rules decision, the real one. His captain had given him an order, a direct, lawful order. And he was going to break it. He was not just risking a court-martial. He was risking everything, on the insane, arrogant belief that he, a 5'4" PFC from East L.A., was right, and the entire United States Marine Corps was wrong. He picked up his rifle. He whispered to his foxhole buddy, "I gotta take a leak." He slipped away. He did not go back to the small cave. He was not going to bring back 2 men. That was a fluke. He needed proof. He needed a number so big, so undeniably massive, that the system would have to stop. He was going to the cliffs. This was a place known as the Japs' Last Stand, a massive sheer rock face riddled with caves, overlooking the ocean. It was a known regimental-sized holdout. The intelligence reports said it held hundreds of soldiers and, God help them, civilians. It was so dangerous, so fortified, that the flamethrower teams would not go near it. The plan, he had heard, was to bypass it, to call in naval gunfire, to seal the entrances with engineering charges and bury them all alive. Gabaldon, alone, was going to take it. He crept through the darkness, a ghost in the jungle. He found a position, a massive black opening in the cliff. He could smell it, the smell of hundreds of unwashed bodies, of sickness, of fear. He was terrified, his hands were shaking, but he was also filled with a cold, righteous anger. He started, his voice small against the ocean breeze. "Hey, in the cave, I am an American Marine." Silence, the silence of 1,000 enemies. He tried again, louder. He projected his voice, his East L.A. Japanese. "The battle is over. Your general, Saito, is dead. He cut his own belly. The island is ours. You are surrounded." He heard a noise, the distinct metallic clack of a Nambu light machine gun being cocked. It was aimed right at his voice. He did not flinch. This was the gamble. He said, "I know what your officers are telling you. They are lying. They are telling you we will torture you. It is a lie." He used his proof. He said, "I just came from the 27th Regiment. I have 2 of your comrades. Their names are," and he gave the names. "They are alive. They are eating American food. They are not tortured." A voice from the cave, a roar. An officer. He was screaming at his men. He called Gabaldon a liar, a trickster. He ordered them to fire, to kill the American devil. No one fired. This was the boardroom conflict inside the enemy's own ranks. Gabaldon, the uncredentialed kid, was in a battle of wills with an imperial Japanese officer. So Gabaldon, the ultimate advocate, made his damn the rules decision. He changed tactics. He was done being nice. He decided to bluff. He shouted, in his roughest, most insulting slang. He said, "Hey officer, you are a coward. You want these men to die for your pride. You are telling them to die while you hide in the back. You are not a true samurai. You are a pig." He heard the officer scream in rage. Then Gabaldon played his trump card, the ultimate, beautiful, terrifying bluff. He shouted, "I am not alone. I am the scout for an entire company of Marines." He pointed back into the darkness. "I have flamethrowers. I have dynamite. At sunrise, in 1 hour, we are going to burn this entire cliff. We are going to blow the entrances and bury you in the rock." He paused. Then he softened his voice. He spoke to the men. "You do not have to die. This is not a heroic death. This is a stupid death. I am giving you 1 chance. I am giving you 10 minutes. Come out, with your hands up. I will guarantee your safety. You will be treated with respect. You will have food. You will have water. You will live." He was offering them a choice, a terrible, fiery death, or an honorable, safe surrender, all based on a lie. He was alone. He had no flamethrowers. He had no dynamite. He was just a kid with a rifle and a facility for slang. He heard a furious argument inside the cave. He heard the officer screaming, "Banzai!" He heard him ordering a charge. And then, a single gunshot from inside the cave. Silence. A profound, terrifying silence. Gabaldon waited. His heart was going to explode. He had failed. He had started a massacre. And then, a figure. A single, starving Japanese soldier, his ribs showing through his torn uniform. He stumbled out into the moonlight, his hands high in the air. He said, "Do not shoot. We are coming out." Another man followed. Then 5. Then 10. Then 20. A shuffling, stumbling, ghostly line of men. They had killed their own officer, the officer who had tried to force them to die. Gabaldon, his M1 held loosely, just watched. He had done it. He had gambled, and he had won. He had defeated the enemy system with words. But the gamble was not over. As the sun began to bleed over the horizon, he heard a new sound, the sound of his own company, the flamethrower teams, moving up the ridge. They were coming to clear the cliff, just as the captain had ordered. Gabaldon, the lone 5'4" PFC, was now standing between 2 armies. He was in command of a platoon of enemy prisoners, and he was directly in the line of fire of his own skeptical leadership. The gamble had worked. Now he had to survive the consequences. The sun began to crack the horizon, a sickening, pale yellow light. It was the light that Gabaldon feared, the light that would bring the flamethrower teams. He was standing, his M1 rifle held loosely at his side, his entire body thrumming with a vibration so deep he thought his bones would break. And he was watching a miracle. It was not a man or two men. It was a river. A silent, shuffling, ghostly river of human beings pouring from the black mouth of the cave. The single gunshot he had heard, the one that had stopped his heart, had been the sound of his victory. The soldiers, the enlisted men, had done the math. They had chosen the tiny, fast-talking American over their own suicidal officer. They had executed him, and now they were coming out. They were not the monsters of the propaganda posters. They were boys. They were starving. Their uniforms were shredded, caked in mud and their own filth. Their ribs were visible, their faces hollowed out by hunger, their eyes wide with a deep, profound, shell-shocked terror. They were sick, wounded, and utterly defeated. Gabaldon, his Japanese slang now soft, encouraging, almost gentle, was motioning to them. He was a shepherd. He was telling them to sit, to put their hands on their heads, to be calm. He told them over and over that they were safe, that the lies were over. They stumbled past him, their eyes fixed on this tiny, impossible Marine, this child, this blue-eyed Oni, this demon, who spoke their language with the accent of a Tokyo street tough, and who was offering them water. The line grew, 10, 50, 100. They just kept coming. They were not just soldiers, they were civilians, terrified Okinawan laborers forced into service. And then, the women. A handful of them, moving in a tight, terrified cluster, their eyes on the ground. They had been told what the Marines would do to them. They were expecting a fate worse than the death they had been running from. Gabaldon saw them, and his heart broke. He spoke to them, his voice changing, becoming respectful, formal. He told them they were safe. He told them, "Anshin shite kudasai." He told them no one would harm them. A new sound. It was the sound he had been dreading, the sound of American voices, the sound of heavy boots on the volcanic gravel, the clank, clank, clank of weapons and gear. He looked up. There, on the ridge above him, silhouetted against the rising sun, was his captain, and behind him, his entire company. And at the front of that company, the man he feared most, the flamethrower man, his twin tanks of napalm glistening, the nozzle of his weapon held at the ready. This was the arrogant advance. This was the system, the doctrine, arriving to do its job. The captain stopped. He was perhaps 50 yards away. He stared down at the scene, and his face, the face of a man who had seen everything, went blank with a new, fresh kind of horror. He did not see a surrender. He could not. His mind was not built for it. He saw a trap. He saw his stupidest, most insubordinate Marine, Gabaldon, standing, very calmly, in the middle of, what? A battalion? An entire regiment of Japanese soldiers? The enemy was not sitting. They were not defeated. They were massing. They were forming up. This was the most complex, most diabolical ambush in the history of the war. And Gabaldon must have turned. He was a traitor, a spy, the Jap lover. He had to be. It was the only explanation. The captain's mind, which saw the world as a problem to be burned, found the solution. He raised his hand. He bellowed, "Gabaldon, get down!" It was a command, a last chance. Get out of the way so I can kill them. To his men, he screamed, "Flamethrower, up, prepare to engage." This was the moment. The new tactic was about to be annihilated by the old one. The hundreds of Japanese prisoners, who had just been convinced they were safe, heard the screaming. They looked up. They saw the new line of Marines. They saw the flamethrower, the one weapon that was the symbol of their worst nightmares. This was it. This was the real trick. The blue-eyed devil had lied. He had gathered them all together in one place so his friends could burn them more efficiently. A wail of pure terror went up. The entire massive crowd of prisoners surged. They began to stand up, to break, to run back toward the caves. They were running back to their deaths, to escape the fiery one they had been promised. Gabaldon was in the middle. He was about to be trampled by his own prisoners or incinerated by his own men. This was the climax. This was the title validation. This was the bluff that had to work, not on the enemy, but on his own side. He did not run. He did not raise his rifle. He did the only thing he could do. He screamed. He screamed at his captain in his high-pitched East L.A. English. He screamed, "No! Stop! Hold your fire!" The captain bellowed back, "Shut up, Gabaldon! That is an order!" Gabaldon turned his back on his captain, a stunning, court-martial-worthy act of defiance. He faced the panicking Japanese. He raised his hands, and he screamed at them. He screamed, "Suare, sit down!" He roared at them in their own slang. He called them fools. He said, "I told you, I promised you, these are my friends. They are here to help. They are not here to hurt you." He was lying, beautifully, magnificently, lying with every ounce of his being. He was a 5'4", 130-pound conductor, his arms waving, his voice cracking, trying to direct a symphony of pure chaos. And then he did the one thing that broke the system. He turned back to his captain. He was furious. He was not a private anymore. He was a man in charge. He strode with his tiny bantamweight frame toward the American line. He looked up at the flamethrower man, and he yelled, "You, put that goddamn thing down! You're scaring them!" There was a silence, a profound, unbelievable, ocean-deep silence. The captain, the flamethrower man, the entire company of hardened Marines, they were frozen. They were in a state of total intellectual paralysis. Their minds simply could not process what they were seeing. They were watching a private first class give orders to a line of Marines. They were watching him scold a flamethrower operator, and most baffling of all, they were watching the entire Japanese army obey him. The Japanese prisoners, seeing this tiny godlike figure yelling at the other Americans, had stopped. They were terrified, but they were sitting. They were watching. He was protecting them. He was, as he had promised, their advocate. The captain's bafflement was total. His world, his simple, brutal, binary world of kill or be killed, had just been turned inside out and upside down. This was not in the manual. This was not doctrine. This was something else. He did not give the order to fire. He could not. He was, for the first time in his career, completely, totally, and utterly confused. He lowered his hand. He said, in a small, choked voice, What is going on here, Private?" Gabaldon, still high on adrenaline, marched up to him. He did not salute. He was too busy. He said, "Sir, I have these prisoners under control. They have surrendered. I need transport, I need water, and I need you," he pointed at the flamethrower man, "back down the hill." The tactic, the stupid bluff, had been proven decisively in combat. It had not just defeated the enemy, it had defeated the doctrine. It had stared down the flamethrower, and it had won. Now, all that was left was the counting. The baffled Marines, their weapons lowered, were called forward, not as an assault team, but as an escort. They began to form the prisoners into a line. It was a line that snaked from the cliff, down the ridge, and out of sight. It was not a platoon. It was a battalion. An intelligence officer arrived, his clipboard shaking. He started to count. He counted soldiers. He counted civilians. He counted the wounded. He kept losing his place. The numbers were too big. They were impossible. This was the validation. This was the title moment. One tiny Marine. One stupid idea. One night of unauthorized, insubordinate, treasonous talking. The final, official, and conservative count of prisoners taken by Guy Gabaldon from that one cliff on that one morning was over 800. The baffled captain could only stand there and watch as the single, greatest, and most impossible intelligence haul of the Pacific War was marched away. All of it the personal property of the tiny, fast-talking, rule-breaking runt he had threatened to court-martial. The expert system had been beaten by the unexpert kid. The bluff was, by the numbers, a work of pure genius. The news did not travel as a victory, it traveled as a problem. It landed on the desk of a G2 intelligence officer, a major, at the 2nd Marine Division headquarters. The report was a statistical impossibility. It was a typo. It had to be. The major, a man who believed in maps, in unit designations, and in the predictable, suicidal arithmetic of the Japanese, read the field report. 1 private. 800 prisoners. This was not a victory. It was a breakdown in his entire universe. His perfect system, his entire understanding of the enemy, was a lie. The enemy was defined by a single, core, unshakable data point. They do not surrender. From this, all doctrine flowed. The flamethrowers, the demolitions, the casualty projections. It was all built on this one fact. And now, this report. This joke. It suggested that the one fact upon which the entire Pacific War was being prosecuted was, in fact, negotiable. The major's reaction was not to celebrate. It was to investigate. He and the captains and the colonels, the entire expert system, were baffled. They were embarrassed. Their multi-million-dollar war machine, their entire corps of trained officers, had been waging a war of extermination that was brutal, costly, and slow. And a 5'4" PFC, a discipline problem, a kid from the slums, had just proven that their entire strategy was not just wrong, it was stupid. He had not just captured 800 soldiers. He had captured 800 rifles, dozens of machine guns, cases of ammunition. He had saved the lives of the Marines who would have been killed clearing that cliff. He had saved the time, the fuel, the napalm, the explosives. He had, in one day, been more efficient than an entire regiment. The system could not allow this to be the truth. It was too humiliating. So, when Guy Gabaldon's captain, the same man who had threatened to court-martial him, now wrote him up for the Medal of Honor, the highest award for courage, the system balked. The recommendation went up the chain, from the company to the regiment to the division, and there, at the top, a general, a man who had commanded the flamethrower teams, looked at the report. A PFC, who had gone AWOL, who had disobeyed direct orders, who had talked. The Medal of Honor was for men who killed 800 of the enemy, not for the man who saved them. The recommendation was denied. It was downgraded. The system, in a grudging, baffled admission that something had happened, awarded him a silver star, a medal for gallantry. It was a pat on the head, a way to make the problem go away. And what of the hero? What of his quiet life? Gabaldon was Gabaldon. He was not a quiet man. He was a loud, fast-talking, rebellious kid. He had not set out to be a hero. He had set out to stop a sickness. He had done his job. He was, for a short, strange time, a legend. The men in his company, the ones who had seen the river of prisoners, the ones who knew their lives had been saved by this runt, they called him the Pied Piper of Saipan. But he was still a PFC. He was still the runt. He finished the war, got his discharge, and he went home. He went back to the old neighborhood. He did not go to college. He did not become a general. He did not try to change the system. He had a family, he ran a bar, he lived a loud, sprawling, complex, and imperfect life, just like the one he had before. He was a man who had, for one brief, impossible moment, held the history of the war in the palm of his hand, and had changed its course with nothing but his voice. And then he went home. He was a man who had performed a miracle, and the miracle was so profound, so revolutionary, that the system that witnessed it chose, for 50 years, to pretend it had never really happened. The moral. What is the lesson in this? The lesson is not that war can be humane. It cannot. The lesson is that doctrine is a lie. The expert system, the high command, had built a strategy of extermination based on a single, flawed assumption that the enemy was a monster, a monolith, a thing without fear or doubt or a desire to live. The man on the ground, the uncredentialed kid, knew the truth. He knew it because he was not an expert. He was just a human. He knew that the enemy was not a monster. The enemy was a 19-year-old boy, just like him, who was starving, who was sick, and who was, above all, terrified. Terrified not just of the Americans, but of his own officers. Gabaldon's bluff, his stupid idea, was a weapon, more powerful, more precise, and infinitely more effective than a flamethrower. The flamethrower was a tool of rage, and it was a failure. It was inefficient. It was the validation of the enemy's propaganda. It was a machine for making martyrs. Gabaldon's weapon was empathy, and he proved in one single day that empathy was not weakness. It was a tactical advantage. He proved that understanding the psychology of the enemy, the lies he had been told, the fears he held, was the key to his defeat. The official doctrine was a suicide pact. It forced the enemy to fight to the death, and in doing so, it forced Americans to die in the process. Gabaldon's unauthorized doctrine, the doctrine of the bluff, of the conversation, saved lives on both sides. It ended the battle. It was not just humane, it was smart. This is the full circle. The unauthorized idea, the stupid bluff of a single PFC, is now the new, standard, and official doctrine. The baffled intelligence officers, the G2s, the ones who could not understand Gabaldon's report, were the very ones who learned the lesson. They studied it, they dissected it, they stole it. On the next islands, on Iwo Jima, on Okinawa, the Marines did not just land with flamethrowers, they landed with loudspeakers. They landed with trained Nisei, Japanese Americans, who did exactly what Gabaldon had done. They got on the bullhorns, and they did not just shout, "Surrender." They used slang. They told jokes. They talked about baseball. They said, "We know what your officers are telling you. It is a lie. We have food. We have water. Your comrades are here and they are safe." This was the birth of modern psychological operations, PSOPs. The unauthorized idea of the kid from East L.A. became a formalized, funded, and essential branch of the United States military. The idea that you could talk an enemy out of his hole, that you could use his own culture and his own fear against him, became a weapon. The bluff was now the doctrine. In 1960, 25 years later, the system finally, quietly admitted its mistake. The Marine Corps, in a review, found that Guy Gabaldon's Silver Star had been a profound, almost criminal understatement. They upgraded it. They awarded him the Navy Cross, the second highest award for valor. It was a quiet admission, a correction in a file. An admission that the runt, the goof-off, the Jap lover, the treasonous, insubordinate PFC had been right all along. The true last stand on Saipan was not the Japanese. It was the American doctrine. It was the expert system, standing on its ridge, holding its flamethrower, staring in baffled, arrogant confusion at a truth it could not and would not understand. A truth that one tiny, overlooked kid, armed with nothing but his voice, had just used to save the world.